Welcome back, everybody, to Shoot to Shit. As always, your boy Lou Nasty here. Joining me today is Rizzo, the mind behind Walmart We Love Wrestling. What's up, man?
What's happening? Glad to be
Yeah.
here. This is going to be a good one. We haven't done one since me and you talked with Just Incredible, so it's been a while. I'm excited to do this again.
A while ago. And also joining us for an interview for the first time ever, the voice of the most legendary Wrestling Figure Federation of all time, Mr. Ryan Ross. Ryan, what's up, brother?
I'm doing good, man. Just hanging out. Super excited to do this today. Super excited to have an absolutely legendary guest.
Yes, speaking of that, like I said, we're all associated here, Rizzo and I, with Walmart We Love Wrestling. We are beyond marking out for our guest today, Mr. TJP. How's it going, man?
How's it going, guys? Thank you very much for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Like I said, we appreciate you being on. So the most asked question that we have when we get people on here is origins. So if we could take us back to the beginning, what made you have that love of professional wrestling?
Well, let's see. I'm going on year 22, 23 now. So Scott started in 1998. I was 13. I never really had like an aha moment for kind of doing this. Like there was really never this thing where like, oh, when I was 6, my parents threw me an Ultimate Warrior birthday party, and like I was like, what's the Ultimate Warrior? Oh my god, I love this. I just like my earliest memories are when I was like 2, 3, like like a baby. Like my earliest memories are like watching Saturday night's main event with my dad in Kansas City, where I was born, and like like the memories are so early, it's almost like feelings. Like I could just kind of remember the show opening. I kind of remember what it felt like watching like, Hogan and Jake the Snake and guys like that era, Roddy Piper, Macho Man. And like, and it consumed my life ever since. I never really had like one single moment. I loved it so much. And was so introverted about it. I just assumed I always assumed that's what I would do with my life in some way someday. And I thought everybody loved it as much as me. Yeah. Like I thought everybody was going to grow up to be wrestlers. Like I was like, my parents are going to be wrestlers. Everybody's going to be wrestlers. Like I knew, like, obviously we have firefighters and architects and doctors and other shit in the world, but for whatever reason, that's how much it consumed me. So I just thought that it's not just my whole world, but everybody must love wrestling as much as I do. So like, as I got older, it was almost like a shock to my system to be like, oh, you don't love wrestling? Like, how do you not like wrestling,
And that's pretty funny because like, I thought pretty similar. I remember cutting a promo on this kid in like kindergarten or first grade, like because the teacher was watching us. I was gonna fight this kid, and I was like, "Oh yeah, but wait till we're older. I'll find you in the WWF." That's funny because, like I said, I assumed everybody loved it as well. That's awesome. So that's my question. I gotta say, we'll kind of keep it running here, and I think Rizzo's got next.
Well, my introduction to you officially, and by the way, I've got a very similar story. My very first memory that I can remember when I was a kid was playing with a big Boss Man action figure. And I think I was like 2 or 3 myself. So I feel you on that. That's my earliest memories too, but I can't take pain very well. So I'm not a good candidate for something like that. But my first real introduction into knowing who it was, without any type of mask on or anything like that, was the Cruiserweight Classic. And for me, that was, man, I wish that was something that was, if not done on a regular basis, a lot more anyway. What are your thoughts on the Cruiserweight Classic as a whole? Like, what was your favorite match throughout all that? And what did you think of the overall product and the end result of it?
So it's weird. I grew up a WWF kid, right? And just say I'm like everybody's kind of had that story. I think if you're our generation or like around roughly our age group, you grew up a WWF kid and all that. But it was never really my goal to end up there. I always really wanted to do the Super J Cup in New Japan. Like that's where I really wanted to go. Like when I started to get old enough to really understand how realistic it would be to do this, that's what I wanted to do. And I still love WWF/WWE and all that. I never thought, and even when I was there, I never thought I need this WrestleMania moment. Like that never appealed to me. So when the Cruiserweight Classic come up, and this is why I mentioned that, like I didn't ever plan on staying, but I did the Cruiserweight Classic because I knew that it would be sort of a kind of an important footnote in wrestling history. Like culturally, you could feel that there was going to be a shift, and that was going to be kind of the fulcrum of it. Because prior to that, you know, I had a couple of like run-ins with WWE. Like when in like 1999, I was in one of the developmentals where I was in John Cena's class actually. It was UPW in Los Angeles, and Victoria was there. I think Miz eventually came through there. And then later I tried to go to FCW. That was the whole homeless story and everything, which everybody loves to document ad nauseum. It's almost an uncool story now because it just gets spammed to death. Unfortunately, it doesn't inspire people the way it should have anymore.
Yeah.
But so, you know, having been through their system a couple times, you know, I already knew like where their sort of ideology and their foundation was, because it would always be like, well, you know, we have a Rey Mysterio, we have a Hoovy, we don't need you. Okay. Then years later, like a decade later, I'm at FCW then, and then it's like, well, we have a Matt Sydal, we have a Tyson Kidd, we don't, you know, we have the one guy that does this, we don't need you. And so when I saw the Cruiserweight Classic came up, I was like, wow, this is a huge deal, because they never looked at wrestling culture that way. And they had just barely let in a couple like independent strongholds. Like they had Finn Balor had just come on in NXT, and Samoa Joe, you know, so like the floodgates weren't open yet, but it was like, wow, this tournament might be their way of saying, all right, like it's a new day now, like we're gonna shake things up. So I wanted to be a part of it, and I thought, okay, this is like, you know, I thought I'm never gonna get to the J Cup. That's like super rare. There had only been like, you know, 4 or 5 of them in history at that point. And I had been in New Japan, and that was cool and all that, but I was like, man, this might be the closest to the J Cup I'll ever get, because this Cruiserweight tournament's going to be like, this is going to change history for how they look at the company, especially if it goes well. Mm-hmm. So that's how I looked at it, was that, you know, I don't know that I'll want to stay here or that they'll even want me, but I'd love to do this, because this is going to be something that's going to be really important. And it kind of turned out to be that, because like, I like a lot of fans will, you know, pull me aside or in like in interviews like this, or just say Q&As, or at, you know, whatever, like meet and greets, and they'll sort of, you know, like I'm designated as the guy that sort of like led the charge of the Cruiserweight generation, and for whatever, you know, I'm like the captain of that. But something that to me feels like it means more to me is that if not for that, NXT might not have been packed with like Adam Cole and Roderick Strong and all these other guys that otherwise would have been looked at as, we don't need these smaller indie guys. But when they saw the success of what we did, and they're like, how can we expand upon this? Now it's like main roster guys that were like former independent dudes, all of a sudden they're getting more important shots because they believe in them more. You know, it just felt like the Cruiserweight tournament finished, and it was like Finn Balor was Universal Champion, and Kevin Owens was Universal Champion, and like, you know, Seth had a secondary run. Like all these guys that used to be not traditional WWE guys, now the company's like, all right, we're willing to believe in all of you. And I just felt like honored just to be a part of it. And, you know, the fact that they gave me so much responsibility is more than I could have ever asked for.
That's awesome.
What was your favorite
part oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, what was your favorite match out of the entire classic?
Probably one of my favorite ones to watch was, I think the match with Jason Lee, because it felt like Bloodsport the movie. Like I was like, wow, this really is like this like melting pot of different, like so out of the box, like professional wrestling styles. And he was such a surprise because he was so talented. But I wish that they would have, you know, used him more, or like kept him around longer, or had him go further, because I thought that he was a special talent. So for me, that was one of my personal favorites, was that. And then of my own, maybe the Gargano match. Like I thought that was pretty cool, just because that was a huge turning point. That, I mean, well, literally and figuratively, that's where people started to really turn on me because they didn't want to see their favorite. Like, they were glad to see me there, but they only wanted to see me do a certain, like, do well, but not too well. And I was like doing way, so they're like, oh, now we're upset. But it was also like, like we had a lot of responsibility because there's a lot of stories to tell. Like, we were telling the story of the tournament. We were telling Johnny's story in the tournament. We were telling my story in the tournament. We're also telling Johnny and Tommaso's story in the tournament. And we're also telling Johnny and Tommaso's story with the Revival, because, I ended up being the guy that hurt Johnny's leg, and now Johnny and DIY suffered because of that. So it's like something I did ended up like trickling into like the next takeover and all this stuff. And then they ended up going head to head. Then they had like an NXT title feud. And like, now that's like a famous feud. And it's like, I thought that was cool, that was like the turning point for so many different stories. And it was just a fun match to do. I've known Johnny a while, and I like him a lot. I think he's incredible. And we got to do a lot of the type of stuff that we like to do. I think we mesh really well. So that was probably my favorite one.
Nice. Yeah, like I said, I loved the main roster crossover where they changed the whole ring for the cruiserweights. That was pretty awesome. I felt, turning it all purple. Ryan, what's up, man?
Well, you mentioned Super J Cup. You mentioned Japan. I'm also like a super big fan of wrestling over in Japan, and I just wanted to ask, like, how did you end up in Japan working for New Japan? Like, what was your story to get there?
I got lucky. So, like I said, when I started, and I think you got to paint the picture of what the world was like at the time. Like, it was the Wild West back in 1998. Like, most people didn't even have cell phones. The internet wasn't really a thing. You had like AOL.com and like WWF.com. Like, that was it. Like, Google didn't exist. MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all these things, they didn't exist. Even like chat rooms and message boards were in their infancy. Like, you could not like really find wrestling on the internet like that. So there wasn't a whole lot of like information, or like, so to put it into perspective, like, I remember when a group in LA, before like what would later be like PWG, there was a group in LA that was trying to book outside talent and sort of start to do non-regional wrestling cards, which was weird at the time, because like I said, information didn't travel so fast back then. And I remember at one point they were going to book Low Ki versus Super Dragon, and we had all heard of Low Ki, but nobody knew what he looked like. We had no concept. Like, he could be 6'5" with a fucking beard. We didn't know. Like, he was like a myth, and that's what wrestling and life was like at the time. Because like, unless you saw it, unless you were like physically witnessed it, or like can kind of communicate it within your circle, like, networking and like reaching outside your bubble was really hard. Like, that's why tape trading was such a big thing at the time, because you just did not have access to stuff. I remember UPW, a lot of the guys were talking about, hey, there's this guy, Amazing Red, that can do this, and he can do cartwheels off the top rope and stuff like that. And we we thought that he was like this tall, like, guy built like a basketball player or something. We had no idea this fool was like Rey Mysterio, like like a Puerto Rican Rey Mysterio. So, and like, so that's what it was like. And so there was no way to formulate like a plan to like achieve your goal. So it was like, oh, I want to go to CMLL, or I want to go to New Japan. There was no way for you to say like, here's how I can do it. Whereas now you could be like, all right, well, I got all my matches on YouTube. I got like a good following on socials. I got my merch store up. People didn't even have merch at that time. Like, you sold like 8x10s. Like, that was it. Most people didn't even have shirts. And stuff. If you had a shirt, it's because you were in like WCW. Like, that's why you had a shirt. You know what I mean? Like, indie people didn't have that. So like, so to formulate a plan Now to go to like, say you want to go to Dragon Gate or something, you can make that happen, or at least have a reasonable way of saying I could go A to B to C and then like kind of figure it out. Back then you couldn't. So I got lucky. And the reason I got lucky was because UPW was like one of the first developmentals for WWF. And I fell into UPW at like 14, 15 years old, just because I just happened to be one of the better performers in the LA area. So like they sort of kind of let me in on scholarship, so to speak. Like it'd be like if you were really good, like if it'd be like if you were a really good indie wrestler in Florida and you were only like 15 years old and NXT was like, yeah, you could train at the PC and do some of the NXT tapings. Like you're not going to be under contract, but you could do some of this stuff. Like that's kind of what it was like. I was like really lucky. And eventually they lost their license with WWE, and WWE moved on to like OVW and then Deep South and then those things. But UPW was a business-minded company. So they wanted to immediately partner up with another big company and keep the ball rolling for themselves. So what they did was partner up with 01 Wrestling, which was brand new at the time. And 01 had just kind of, was mostly a group that split off from New Japan. So in that process, me just being this dopey kid, like around UPW at the time when they were transferring from one office to another, the Inoki family happened to be part of that transition process because they were kind of a go-between for 01 and New Japan. Okay. And they were like, hey, New Japan's going to open up a satellite gym out here and they want to start another Young Lions class for young wrestlers. And so who are the best guys you got? And so like they said, you know, well, we have Rocky Romero, his partner, Ricky Reyes at the time. They held an open tryout and that's how they found Brian Danielson, or, you know, everybody knows him as Daniel Bryan now. And then me, and they said, then there's this kid. And so that's how I ended up in New Japan. So then over the summer of my senior year, it was like I'd be going to school all day and then I would go drive out to Santa Monica and train in the dojo. And then when I turned 18 in the fall, like a week later, they processed the visa, set me on a tour. And it just, I got lucky. That's really all it is. I got lucky.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I will try to give this backstory out as quick as I can. So I'm in the Navy. I've been in a long time, and I've been stationed on the West Coast twice, and I meet a lot of people. And I'm kind of the guy that from command to command, I either get people to start rewatching wrestling or into it. So there's time on the boat where I got everybody tune into the Armed Force Network during like Mania and like just other kinds of WWE events and things like that. So I met, like I said, this is where it's gonna transition. I met a lot of people, a lot of Filipinos that I got into watching wrestling, and two of them that I keep in contact a lot today. One of them's name's Jamie Ferrer. So Ferrer, he wanted me to say thank you, you know, for being a representation of Filipinos, and my buddy Rosella. He wanted to know how Filipino are you? So he asked if you liked balut.
Oh yeah, so I like balut, the concept, because it's the funniest okie doke that I think my culture has. Like, oh, you got to try balut. But like most Filipinos, I know they don't really like balut. Some do. Like some like more adventurous eaters, they like it as a delicacy. But I love the concept of it. I don't necessarily like it for real. And I guess to demonstrate how actual Filipino I am.
This dude's got an example. That's all.
I grew up with one of these in my house, and
Nice.
to this day I still have one in my house. This is a walis, and this is the equivalent of like the Italian grandmother's wooden spoon, or like the chancla in you know,
gotcha.
like a Hispanic household. So this is our, you know, every Filipino household has one of these. And I grew up with a yaya, which is like a nanny. Yeah, a Filipino knows the word yaya because it's like it's their nanny. And mine was my Lola, which is my grandmother. Yeah, I mean, there was always rice cooking in the house, and always Filipino you know, bad words being slung in my direction by my elders. So, you know, for a half Asian kid, that I had a fairly Filipino household, you know.
Nice. Like I said, Ferrer and Rosello would definitely appreciate that. They
Well,
probably would have known where it was if you pointed with your lips too. It's like it's over there.
Oh yeah. Yon, yeah. No, I appreciate that, and yeah, I'm glad that they enjoyed it, and a lot of what the goal has been, especially like in my later years, is been to sort of not so much open up representation and to be a beacon of it myself for like me, but just because like Filipinos are so underrepresented. I joke that you know, the meme video of, I'm pretty sure she's Filipino, the look at all these chickens,
Yeah.
and the little girl's like talking about a bunch of like
yeah. Look at
so
all
I'm pretty
these
sure
chickens.
I'm pretty sure she's Filipino, and I joke with my friends that if you made like an all-time like Filipino public figures list, she's like top 5. Like we don't have very many representatives, you know. We got like Manny Pacquiao, Batista, and then like that girl, and then I might be number 4. Like there's not many of us, you know. So like, so you know, the goal was that, like, I know that there's a lot of, you know, Filipino people in different walks of life that maybe they don't claim it as much as they can, and maybe they don't feel like they can because people don't understand them. And so I grew up that way. Like in wrestling, there's times when I was told I couldn't have a job because I didn't speak Spanish fluently, so they couldn't put me in a mask and pass me off as a Mexican wrestler. And I'm like, guys, I'm an Asian kid. Like, you know, not, I mean, I would love to be able to do that for you, but is it so much to ask for me to just be me? And they're like, well, that's nobody knows what that is. We don't need that. And it's like, all right, well, so, you know, not that that was like the reason for my goal, but that's one of many examples that it's like, I hate to think that other people deal with that in whatever walk of life. So I just wanted, you know, Filipinos to have another example other than just like Manny and whoever, like, to say like, yeah, you know, I'm proud of this and I want to claim it. And, you know, whether you're, you know, a plumber or a dentist or whatever, you know, just for that. And if you're part of a different culture, you know, maybe it's a religion or an orientation thing, and it's like, oh, I wish there was more representation. But it's like, you know, you may not be Filipino, but if you look and see what I'm doing to try and, you know, help build a bridge so that not so I can cross it, but so other people can cross it, then maybe in whatever walk of life or whatever you're representing, whether maybe it's the LBGT community or something like that, I would help, hopefully, you know, inspire others to feel more strength as far as embracing whatever they are. So
For sure. I think we got Riz next. My man.
There's something I kind of wanted to circle back to real fast. I don't think people understand just how impossible it was to find some of that stuff in the 90s, like you were talking about. I live 30 minutes away. I live 30 minutes away from Dayton, Ohio, where they have Hobart Arena, where all these legendary events happen throughout ECW and the Heat Wave incident with Bubba Ray getting in people's face. That all happened 30 minutes away from me. As a kid, I didn't even know ECW existed until that DVD came out, The Rise and Fall of ECW. And all these legendary events happened 30 minutes away from me. People don't fathom how impossible it is, or at least it was back then, you know, to see some of these things. And if you didn't get the wrestling mags, you didn't know it existed. You know, it's crazy, you know, and so I just wanted to touch on that real fast, but I didn't want to interrupt anyone. So to your point, you were absolutely correct.
When I first got started, I spent so after I graduated junior high, I was going to start high school. So I spent the early part of that year, 1998, I spent the early part of that year and the early part in the summer writing real letters, because we didn't, you know, have text messaging and a lot of people didn't have emails yet. I wrote physical letters with stamps and everything to like all these wrestling schools, like the, you know, Larry Sharp and like Dean Malenko had a school in Tampa and like all these different places, all pro wrestling in San Francisco. And I'm in Southern California. And for like a 13-year-old kid, which is already like pretty rare to like try to get started at that time, like at that age, but like, you know, what am I going to relocate? Like there's no way, you know, but this is all I knew, you know, that's the only places I knew that like, okay, this is like, this is where guys go. So I got to figure out how to go there. I wrote a thing for Shawn Michaels School, which hadn't started yet. They were just kind of had like pamphlets you can get, for the future class that eventually ended up being like Daniel Bryan and Brian Kendrick and those guys. I had no idea that just home in Los Angeles, there was like all this, like there's so many lucha libre gyms and stuff all around me. I had no clue. And it wasn't until I went to summer school for starting high school. And in summer school, some kid was wearing a t-shirt from the local pro wrestling gym that was nearby. And I asked what that was. And they told me, and it turned out it was like 10 minutes away. And I had no idea. I was sitting right on top of a place that would eventually be how I got my start the whole time. And I'm riding to these places that are like in New York and Ohio and Florida and San Francisco. And I had no idea there was one right there because you don't know. There's no way to find that out. Just accident,
What's a letter? What's a step? Just kidding.
Ryan, you're talking about kind of getting your start and finding these gyms. Me personally, I was waiting to do the same thing and start training to eventually start professionally wrestling. But then the pandemic kind of put a halt on those plans. But as things are starting to get back to normal, more people are getting vaccinated, and just the journey is starting to feel more real. It's getting closer. What is your advice to somebody who's just starting out or wanting to start out in professional wrestling?
Man, it's tough. I get asked this quite a bit, like when I will be at shows or something like that, and it's always from younger wrestlers. And like I said, I mean, the world was so different when I was getting started, and I almost don't know how I would start today, but I think, same as probably how I did. I mean, you got to find a place to get started. And I actually, like, one of my favorite tattoos I have is this poem right here called The Road, and I have it on my chest. It was written on the wall in New Japan Dojo. Antonio Inoki wrote it. And the moral of the story is that you may not know what your destination is, and you may not know what you want to do, I guess, theoretically with your life. But that doesn't mean that you have to know exactly how the road's supposed to go before you get started. You just take one step, and that step leads to the next one, which leads to the next one. Before you know it, you look behind you, you've already carved your own road, you didn't know, and so you got to get started. So I think, finding a place, and it's not, it doesn't have to be too cerebral. A lot of guys, and by guys, I mean, wrestlers and elder statesmen, I guess you could say, will kind of emphasize like a vetting process and trying to find where to get started. And it's a little bit important, but it's not super dire, because, you get started, you cut your teeth, you're going to end up going to a bunch of different places. You're not going to start, if you start and end in the same spot, then that's the least of your problems. Something else was the problem, Yeah. But even if you get started and it's not the best place, but it's a place where you can get started and do it safely and learn a few things, like your real education is the journey itself. It's not going to take place in any one ring. When I got started, I trained at like 7-8 different gyms. Like I would find out who else has a wrestling gym. They'd say, oh yeah, there's one across town to this place. Oh my God, what's their schedule like? Oh yeah, they do, these nights a week and at these times. I'm like, God, I could finish here after a few hours and then go there for 2 more hours. I'd be in a ring for like 5 hours, but like, it didn't matter to me. I just wanted to go anywhere that's how I ended up in like UPW and all these places. Cause I was just like, where can I go to continue doing this? And then they were like, yeah, go here. And then, you build good relationships with the people that you're training with. And it really becomes less about the gym itself and who's running it, who the coaches are. Like you'll learn some stuff and, sometimes you'll pick up bad habits if you're too focused on what they're saying. But if you keep an open mind and you have fun and you keep moving, that's the best thing. Just get started and don't think too hard about it. Just take the opportunities as they come to get in the ring, and then trust me, you'll know what to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much.
And if we can go back to that, I know you said you started training at 13 years old. You must have some really cool parents. Because I don't know if that would fly today, but like I said, what led to that? Like how was the training with that? And did you have like any fees or anything that you had to pay at 13?
So the gym that I started at was they had a day fee. So it wasn't like a lot of other places where it's like, you know, we have like a 3-month training camp and it's like $3,000 or whatever the case may be. It was like literally a day fee. So you pay a day fee, you go just like an old school boxing gym. Like you can pay a day fee, $15, $25, and you go and work out with whoever's there or by yourself or whatever the case may be. So it was pretty easy because I just had to, you know, initially come up with very minimal money at the time just to get in and train. But like, you know, and this is also me being lucky. Like I picked it up very naturally. So like there was almost nothing I ever had to be told twice to do that I didn't get it. Like I can't think of anything that they were like, do this. And I was like, I don't know how, like, I'm not getting it. Like, so because I excelled so quickly, they didn't even charge me gym fees. They just wanted me in around the gym a lot because they're like, oh yeah, come back whenever you can, because it's good to have guys that are really cracking at this like around, because then other people who are just starting or not so good at it, like it makes the group better. So they would always, I rarely had to pay any gym fees when I was first starting. So mostly it was just that I was super young, so they kind of had to pretend like it was legal. You really can't, you really shouldn't be, you know, throwing a kid to the lions like that. That's a very lucha libre thing. You know, if you can walk, you can do this. So, you know, it's like boxing for like, you know, like Mexican culture with boxing. If you can fit the gloves on your hands, we'll teach you how to swat, you know? And so that's why there's so many like Mexican legends in boxing, because their whole life is that, you know? Same thing with wrestling. Like kids grow up in the gym in lucha libre, and so that's kind of what I was. I came up in the gym like that and at that age, and so that was really that. And my parents, like, I don't know, I matured really fast as a kid. My parents both worked for the airlines, so they were gone a lot. That's why I had like my grandmother be like our caretaker for the most part, because they'd be gone like 2-3 weeks at a time, sometimes flying. And a lot of times I was mostly left to fend for myself. So I learned how to do my own laundry when I was like 10 years old. And I could like make basic foods and stuff when I was like 8-10 years old. Like I could use the microwave and like make stuff. Like I never put my fingers in light sockets and like shit like that when I was a kid, you know? So like, as I got older, like I never had curfews. I never cared where I ran off to, you know. I could disappear in the afternoon and walk to the mall or take the bus somewhere. And my parents never questioned it at all, because we were very detached as a family and they trusted me. They treated me like I was 30 when I was 13. So when I started wrestling, they didn't even really know about it. They didn't care. They didn't keep tabs. They just, you know, I wasn't getting arrested, and I've always been, not by belief, but just by happenstance, I've always been straight edge. Like I've never done drugs or drank or anything like that. So they've always been like, you know, he's never given us a reason to worry. So, you know, until he comes home in a cop car, like, there's no reason to care. And since I never did, they were always fine with it.
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah. I mean, they were really cool in that regard, but it's mostly just because they trusted me. So
nice.
Hey, just think about it. In an alternate reality, you could have been the West Coast Mass Transit if you really think about
it. No, because he just said, you know, he told the truth. He would have lied about his age. He just gave the deception, you know. He's like, I know I'm young, so I'm just not going to tell you how old I am, as long as you let it happen, right?
Yeah, my first coaches, they have a hard time placing when I got started, because I don't think I signed a waiver or anything. They're just like, you know, were they going to ask me to sign a waiver? You know, so a lot of times they don't know. They're like, when did you get started? 15, 14, 16, you know, whenever. They don't really know, and they can't really remember. It's hard for me to remember too. I mean, I vaguely remember. It's August of '98. I only know because of summer school. I just remember I discovered you guys during summer school. That's all I can remember.
Yeah, I did like I said, a brief stint on the indies, and I started probably about 15 years old. I lied about my age at a place I went to, and my real life brother got trained after me, and he's actually older. So when he debuted at this place, according to their records, they were like, yeah, so he's the older brother actually, even though I look way younger, because I lied. But Rizzo, I know you got cut out briefly, but it's your turn. Coming back.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's all good. So let's say I was a huge fan of TNA. Right before, I know this is very cliche and everything, but right before the Hogan era started, huge fan.
Yeah.
I didn't stop becoming a fan because of Hogan. Something around that time, I just kind of lost my fandom, and then I came back shortly before the Cruiserweight Classic, actually. But I'm very curious, and I like asking anyone who's ever been through the doors of TNA what their experience was like. Looking back, and I understand, recently you've done business with them, but before that, I guess, before over the last weekend or so, what is it? What's your overall feeling about the product of TNA / Impact? What do you think their legacy is going to be as somebody who's been through there before?
So what you're saying is you tuned out because I was there for a few years.
Damn it, Rizzo.
I'm not even going to combat it. I'm just going to let it fly.
Actually, I actually know kind of exactly what you mean though. Like there was a big shift artistically. Not any one thing. You could just kind of feel like it had a different theme to it for a few years there, that's coming from somebody from like I mean, I was there year one, so I got to see it all the way through, and it for sure was a thematic change.
It felt like I remember Hogan coming out and introducing the four-sided ring at whatever pay-per-view that was, and almost immediately something inside of my brain was like, oh, this is bad. And hearing, interviews after the fact from guys like, Hogan and Bischoff in particular, who I'm a huge fan of, and hearing that it wasn't them, it wasn't them pulling those strings.
Right.
There was, I don't know what that shift was, but you were absolutely right. That was the first moment where I'm like, oh my God, the promotion that I'm in love with is about to go downhill,
It felt like WCW, not in a good or bad way, but it felt like WCW. That's how I felt, I don't know. I mean, from a legacy standpoint, I kind of think that like with WCW, if you think of WCW, you think of the NWO or you think of the Cruiserweight division. Like that's probably if you had to make a top three things that make you think of WCW, I think it's like you think NWO, Cruiserweight division, and Sting. Like that's pretty much it, right? And I feel like, maybe TNA, their legacy goes down as like X division. In my opinion, that'll probably be the thing that like is like the one of the big lasting themes is that they gave us the X division. And then there's like, that maybe ahead of that or maybe slightly behind that, it's sort of like the introduction for like the generation that took over wrestling, like because then AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, like all these different guys, myself, guys that went on to like WWE and start to do bigger things or like kind of make little footnotes in history, and it's like, wow, these are like the guys, like especially a guy like AJ, like I think you look at TNA as like that was really their home. And I think forever, that's sort of like, even to this day, like you kind of think, I still think AJ is like a TNA guy. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like no matter what he does in WWE, he could own WWE someday. And I'd still be like, I'd still think of TNA when I think of AJ. And I think that's sort of, but again, that sort of plays into what the X Division was, that became this new cultural thing. Because if you look at all these regional, like you kind of know it is, because I remember the late 2000s going to like these indie companies and regional companies and stuff, and it's like, oh, we have a no limits title here, or we have a velocity division, and it's like you have your own X division, is what you're saying, and it's like, wow, that was what like what a like stamp in culture, in wrestling culture, that was, that it became something that every place emulated. We have to have our own X division. This is awesome. So it's kind of like, I feel like that goes down as their legacy. And even to this day, like recently being the X division champion recently, and then doing interviews and talking about the history of it and stuff. And I say it in the interviews, but I really believe it in real life, that like, I kind of see that as the most important title they have, more than their world title, because that's what people think of when they think of TNA. They think of the X division, and it became this last generation, it became like the working man's title, kind of like how we always looked at the Intercontinental title, like Ricky Steamboat, Macho Man, Mr. Perfect, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. These guys were the Intercontinental champions. These were like the dudes, And I feel like the last 15, 20 years, that's how young wrestling fans have seen like the X division title. It's like, yeah, like you had Sting, Jeff Jarrett, Kurt Angle, some of these guys were the world champion, TNA and all that, Jeff Hardy. But it's like, man, the X division guys are really the anchors of like the guys who can really wrestle, or however people look at it. And so I feel like that is sort of their legacy, the X division.
Well, on that, this is my kind of like game room. I keep a lot of my, obviously, figures and stuff, and a lot of memorabilia. And there's one thing that I always keep on my desk here, and it's this Best of the X Division DVD set, because at any point in time, I will pull this out and I will watch it. This is probably one of my favorite videos that TNA has ever put out. So to your point, you are 100% correct. The X division, I think, as well, is also the legacy, to be honest.
Yeah, and then pertaining to that new generation, when they swapped the rings out and stuff like that. I mean, I remember getting there, coming back to the company around that time. That's when I became Suicide, and like meeting Bischoff and working with him a little bit in the back, and like from the creative standpoint, and then being around Hogan, I got to work with him like a lot on screen and everything. So I got to pick his brain a lot and learn different things from him. And honestly, like people have such a wacky narrative of them, because they like there was, I don't recall ever a single negative thing from them other than people projecting outside perception. Yeah. And Bischoff was so like easy to work with. And I remember asking questions, making suggestions, and he was cool with everything. And you could totally change an idea he had. And he was like, okay, well, I think we can make this work. And how could we make it work and stuff like that. It was never like, an iron fist is the complete opposite of how they were. And like Hogan was like just another dude. Like, I mean, I remember coming out of the locker room and all of us were headed towards ringside because there was like a talent meeting and a production meeting. And Hogan was coming out of the locker room with us and like, hey, what time is this thing? And like, he didn't know anymore. He was just another guy, just like we were. It's not like he was calling these shots or was super inaccessible or anything like that. It was, I mean, he's honestly one of the most down to earth people I've ever met in my life. It's crazy because it's almost like he doesn't realize he's Hulk Hogan,
Yeah. I think with that era, I think I'm a huge opponent to dirt sheets in general. I don't like them. I don't like what they represent. I don't like the people that are writing it for the most part. I think what happened there was you only got a one-sided story from the dirt sheets, and the dirt sheets want you to believe Hogan and Bischoff are the devil. So the fact that there is documentation out there that says Viacom did not pay for any of these major contracts, that is out there and Viacom did pay for the major contracts. TNA did not. And that's the overall belief is, Bischoff and Hogan bankrupt TNA. There's no proof of that, but that's why. And if anything, there's proof of the opposite. There's proof that, those contracts were not being fronted by Total Nonstop Action. They were being fronted by Viacom, but people don't want to hear it. They're so dedicated and villainizing Hogan and Bischoff that they think that they're these just demons. And I don't understand it. I understand the whole Hogan thing to a degree, but Bischoff not at all. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of his. So that one always irritates me a little bit, but yeah,
well,
I think you're absolutely right.
In regards to that, like, as far as like the business aspect, I think that, there's wrestling is just such a small sample size as far as major league level. Like you have sort of the early days of NWA, not the early days, but you know, you have the WWF, and then you have a section of NWA when it became like WWF level and it's like mainstream, like they're both kind of there, and then that became WCW, and then that's like it. You know, TNA now is like on this, you know, 20-year run of being, you know, a viable like mainstream level company. And other than that, like what other examples do we have? There's really not anything else unless you go to other countries, and then it's sort of like hard to compare, you know, CMLL and AAA, for example. How do you compare that? Mexico is totally different. So is Japan. So New Japan or like early All Japan, like it's hard to compare that. But in America, especially, you know, regarding like TV networks and things like that, and like the business side of it, there's not a real big sample size. So I think people get ahead of themselves by trying to draw certain conclusions, because it's like, what, like, how are you comparing this? Like, to be honest, success is rare. Like, how long was WCW around? I mean, really around like 10 years? Like, people think that it was around forever. It wasn't. That, I mean, that's not a long time. And if you really talk about the time like where they were hot and like super lucrative on TBS, and we're talking 5 years. Like, it wasn't like a long time. And like with the WWF, like they got lucky building this great relationship with USA and like the parent company, that for the network that their content's going to go on. So like, that's not a good comparison for other companies, because it's like they found this household connection, so they could always be on USA. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like when you look at say TNA, they have their early days and they're plugging away with the weekly pay-per-views. Then they become this proper mainstream company with like, you know, their monthly pay-per-views, which I was on the first one. I remember being there. So like I was lucky to be there year one. And then their weekly show on Spike TV. And then you know, like any show has a relationship that's going to go like this, you know, and it's not going to last forever. You know, not every show is The Simpsons, you know, like how many television shows last more than a decade on a network, and the networks at any point is not like, I think we're over it. Like we've got as much as we can out of it. So like for them to have been on Spike for as long as they were, like eventually that's not always going to be the same relationship. Sometimes it's going to be great. Sometimes it's not going to be great, you know? Mm-hmm. And so like at a certain point, like when people talk about like rises, declines and stuff like that, dude, for a company to be around 10 plus years, and at this point now 20 years, and for such a long stretch on one network, dude, that's amazing success. Like that's the sort, if that were a regular TV show on a different network, that is the type of thing that would make a producer's career. Like they're a made man for having had that much success. But for some reason in wrestling, they're like, oh, you're a complete failure. And it's like, well, it's not going to last forever. But if you're a young wrestling fan, you have no concept of the business side of it. So I think that's really what it comes down to. Because then when they have no concept of it, and then they're stuck on a narrative, they have to find a scapegoat and then insert guys like a Bischoff or whoever. And it's like, well, it's not their fault, you know. It's an old TV show. It doesn't last forever.
Yeah. And Rizzo's all about that leave Bischoff alone.
He was a good dude. I've having been around him, I've seen him in a bad mood, and I got a kick out of him when he was in a bad mood. And I've seen him, and for the most part, he was always in a good mood. And he was always a good dude. I never thought he was ever unfair about anything.
Awesome. Yeah. And speaking of suicide, I think Ryan had some suicide questions for you.
I did. You mentioned suicide. Obviously, awesome gimmick. I wanted to know how you got chosen as one of the many people who played him over the years, and what was your favorite moment or match as Suicide?
Well, I got chosen as a suggestion from myself, actually. But I almost, it has a weird cosmic connection to me, because in 2008, I was there. The early years, I was always there as Puma, different mask character. And 2008, I was in Houston at a pay-per-view, Destination X maybe. And part of the way through the pay-per-view, I remember Frankie Kazarian coming back to the locker room. The office had pitched him the new character, Suicide. Like, we have this idea, we'd like you to portray this. And Frankie could not have been more bummed out and upset. He didn't want to do it at all. And I don't blame him. It's not that the character is a bad idea. I think the character is great. I think that, like, that's another thing. When you think of TNA, like the X Division title and maybe like AJ, Jeff Jarrett, Sting, I kind of feel like Suicide is somewhere on the short list of things you think of when you think it's TNA. You know?
Yeah, because it's part of the video game, right?
Yeah, it's part of the lineage now, you know, and I think that if you're being fair about it, it's pretty cool in its own right as far as the character goes. But Frankie didn't want to do it, and rightfully so. He was getting a chance to finally sort of break out and be himself, and I thought he was doing, you know, he was really sort of like finding his groove, and he didn't want to kind of set himself back by doing that. And Christopher Daniels jokingly in the locker room, the group of us was like, they should just have TJ do it. He's already in a mask. They just swap him out and put him in a new character. And he'll actually get a push and stuff. And we all laughed and we're like, yeah, that'd be good. And then I remember that was my last show for the company for a while. I went back to, I don't know, Japan, or did some other stuff, Ring of Honor. I don't remember what I did. And so Frankie became Suicide. And then, you know, years later, 2012, I came back as Puma, and they're like, okay, well, just hang out at home for a little bit. We'll think of something to do. And it took, you know, a couple weeks go by and they couldn't really think of any creative. And they had these bumpers for Suicide is coming back. Suicide is coming soon. Suicide will be here next week. And I called them and I said, do you have anybody in mind for this? Because I know that lately it's been a rotating door. You couldn't nail it. Like, they had a few guys playing it because nobody really wanted to do it. And they're like, because I was like, if you don't have anybody in mind, I would love to come in and do it. I'm just sitting at home, and I know you guys are waiting to think of an idea for me, but in the meantime, I would love to come to work. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. We could have you do it. And they just, I guess the way, and nothing against the other guys, but the way that I portrayed it, I guess, was the way that they had always envisioned it being, like sort of like more of a cruiserweight style and more of like a superhero, and the types of moves I would do. Because the other guys are more like heavyweights, you know, Christopher Daniels, Kazarian, they wrestle like heavyweights. Yeah. So like when they saw that, they were like, God, we only were going to bring it back for one night, but this is how we always thought it would be. And then they were like, can you do another one? And 1 week led to 2, which led to the pay-per-view, which then all of a sudden I'm the X Division champion by the end of the year. So
nice.
But yeah, and probably my favorite match might be the night I won the X Division title. That was pretty cool. Me and Sanjay and Trent had a match. It was Ultimate X match. It was a fun one.
And one more question. Out of all the places you've been all over the world, Japan, Mexico, here in the States, who has been your favorite person to work with, either as like a tag team or just one-on-one?
God, probably Rocky Romero. And he's like my oldest friend in the business. He was one of the guys that, you know, he had been around a couple of years, like when I first got in. So he was always been sort of like my older brother. And for people that like have followed me for a while and they take note of my, like, you know, smooth movement and the way that I wrestle, like I get that from Rocky. Like he was always like so easy and picture perfect and just moved like water, that sort of rubbed off on me. So, you know, he's one. Speaking of the previous question, one of my favorite matches in TNA was with Jeff Hardy. They had us do a singles match. It was sort of supposed to be like a dream match sort of thing, like the new like hot singles wrestler with me as Suicide and X Division champion versus like, you know, this like growing legends was Jeff Hardy. And that was awesome. That really opened my eyes a lot as far as like the value of a big star, because he's so automatic and he's amazing. And so about, I don't know, it's probably not even a year ago, like a lot of internet fans dumped a lot of heat on me for comments I made about being like a quarterback in a match and being a ring general. And a lot of that, what I said is stuff I learned from being in the ring with Jeff that day, was because he's so automatic, and like being in there with somebody who's like, you know, one of the greatest of all time, and knowing that I could work with him on that capacity and learn stuff from him, but like that I could lead him and still be a quarterback for this amazing receiver, you know, like if I was Joe Montana, he was definitely Jerry Rice that day, because he's like the greatest, you know. So he's a guy that I really loved, because he represented my idea of how to grow into a more complete professional. I've always admired him for that. And I mean, there's tons. Everybody I work with is a treat. And you know, people ask me for my bucket list all the time, like what's my dream match? I always like to say whatever the next one is, because I mean, like I whatever the next one is, I hope is the best match I ever have. And everybody I've worked with has always been a pleasure.
That's a fantastic mindset. That's awesome. I really like that.
So if you don't mind, we have two guys from Walmart that couldn't be here with us today. So they had a couple questions that I'll kind of go through that they asked here. So first one was from our boy Jubag. He was asking if there's any truth to the rumor that you were punished in WWE for getting a new tattoo without permission.
No, there's no truth to that. I mean, if there is truth to that, then they didn't notify me. So that would be news to me. I think where that comes from, because and this sort of goes back to like the Hogan and Bischoff stuff. Like a lot of times when people get scapegoated for something, it continues because it's an unequal system. Like you're talking about one person's voice or two people's voice versus like a million people's voice. So it's like, it's kind of hard to continue like defending against a false narrative. Like at a certain point, you just let it go because nobody's listening to you defend it. They want to believe in it anyway. And there's too many people to convey that to straighten it out. You know what I mean? Like nobody's ever, it's not like the whole world is listening to you at any one time. So it's like, it's almost like there's no point in defending it. So a lot of the thing is that I'm not really an active social media person in that way. Like, so when stuff like that, for example, comes up, I don't spend every day as much as I can saying, no, that's not the case at all. Like, it's like, oh, whatever, if you believe it, whatever, I don't care. But I think it was like when I left WWE, I didn't give a statement like other guys did. Like I didn't have this letter like, oh, I'm so tired of this or that. It's just, I left. And so since there was no explanation for it, and because shortly after that, they were trying not to get guys to leave, that it was like, well, we have to make sense of why this guy was able to go. And it's like, well, it must have been something negative. I bet it was this. And it was like, and there was like, I mean, there was like a handful of different totally unrelated theories. Like he must be a malcontent in the locker room. And it's like, I get along with everybody. It's like, oh, it must be his tattoos. And it's like, well, it wasn't that either. But I think the tattoos thing stuck because being on 205 and sort of sometimes on Raw in like peaks and valleys, they don't get to see me every week. So it's like, if you saw me in, I don't know, say August, and then you didn't see me again until the second week of September. And then maybe I had a couple matches in a row, and then you didn't see me again till like Halloween. So if I was getting all of my tattoos done, which I was at one time, which was the advice from Randy Orton was the one that told me, he was like, if you're going to get work done, get as much of it done as you can when you know you're going to have downtime. If you're injured, that's the perfect time. Or if you know you're going to have time off, or they're creatively like putting you on hold for a little bit, and you're not going to be on TV, do it then. So that way you're not constantly bandaging up and like while you're healing, so you can just get it all out of the way. So I said, that's great. That's perfect. I'm a cruiserweight, so I'm not on all the time anyway. So it's perfect. Yeah. So for a viewer on the outside, you see me, all of a sudden I appear after a few weeks, I have the whole sleeve done. But on the inside, Vince, Michael Hayes, all these guys, talent relations, they see me every single week. So they see each and every piece every week. If I was going to be fired, they would have fired me then. They wouldn't have waited 6 months and fired me later, Yeah. And so I would see Vince every day and, oh, is that the new one? Let me see. Let me look at it, blah, blah, all that. So, and I took like a year to get these approved. I remember asking Carano and the talent relations office, like, this is what I want to do. Here's the pictures of all the art. And just wait. And it took a long time to approve it because Vince is very hands-on. Like he doesn't want to delegate anything. And talent relations would joke with me. They're like, we wish he would just let us make the judgment calls on these things, like the smaller things, like a new haircut or something like that. But he wants to be able to say yes or no to everything. So it took a long time because Vince was working on other shit. And eventually he was like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. But yeah, I didn't get punished for tattoos.
Nice. Well, on that note, it's leading to our next guy, Cephas. So some kind of side notes thrown in there is he's a big fan of the gamer gimmick, and he wanted to know what is your absolute favorite game ever, like one that you can play over and over.
Probably Super Mario World. That was like my first favorite game ever when I was a kid. And lately, probably Overwatch as far as modern stuff. It's just so easy to pick up and play, and it's like the Street Fighter of team shooters. You know, everybody's got a unique gimmick and character, and you don't need to know too much about it. So those probably be my two that I would say.
Oh, nice. And so along that lines, he said, what is your favorite fighting game? And who is your go-to character, I guess, along with that?
So my favorite fighting game is probably Marvel vs. Capcom. I was a big Marvel vs. Capcom, guy. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3 were amazing to me. And for that, I'd probably say my go-to is usually I'd build out a team with, so if it was 3, I'd build out my team with like Ryu, Deadpool, and probably Dante from Devil May Cry. Those were usually my trio.
Nice. So I'm gonna finish with Cephas's last 2 questions, and I'll let Rizzo and Ryan take us home here. So his last 2 are: who is somebody in professional wrestling that is a huge gamer that we may not expect?
Oh man, I was actually kind of surprised to find out that Randy was. He plays more than you would think.
Nice.
And everybody knows he's a gamer, but I don't think people realize the extent of how much of a gamer he is. But Samoa Joe, and what I mean by people know he plays games, but I mean this dude will finish 12 games in a month. I mean this guy, he finishes games like he's in school trying to get his master's degree. He finishes games like their homework. It's crazy. I remember I'd visit him at his house and for dinner or something like that, and he would be like, "Here," and he'd hand me a stack of 6 games. I finish these. And I'm like, I probably won't finish these in a year. Yeah. He really gets through some content. He'll get through them a lot. Yeah.
Nice. He was saying, please say Sergeant Slaughter on that
one. I don't know him well enough, but maybe. I don't know.
Nice. And his last one was, what is your favorite pro wrestling game ever?
Fire Pro. The Fire Pro series is probably my favorite. Okay. Yeah. I don't know, the rhythm of it, and being a guy that always wanted to go to New Japan, and the way that the intensity of the back end of a match, how that feels, I think Fire Pro captures it more than any other game. So I love that about it.
Awesome. And I guess a side note, how excited were you that you made the 2K series? For,
you can imagine for a gamer kid growing up and an existing one, that to be in a video game is pretty cool. I never played as myself though. I don't really I'm not a fan of a lot of modern wrestling. So when I play it, I always play as Rick Rude or Macho Man and Surfer Sting, guys I grew up watching. I never really play as Seth or Sami Zayn or contemporary people. So I never played as myself, but it's really cool to see your name on the list. And when my character model would be the main menu randomized background, I mean that was always really cool. Hear my music playing as part of the soundtrack. Yeah, stuff like that was it's still cool. Yeah.
Awesome. And Rizzo, you my friend.
Well, I don't necessarily have a question. I always like to end these type of things with just, telling everybody we talk to, thank you for your contributions to the business. I've enjoyed watching what you do ever since I discovered you at the Cruiserweight Classic. I was actually really bummed out when they cut when you guys parted ways. I've been a big fan of yours ever since then. I enjoy watching your work. I do follow you on Twitter. I appreciate your candor to your beliefs, and we'll leave it at that for that. I hold a lot of the same, and there's not a whole lot of people that are brave enough to put it out there. So that's something extra I want to thank you for. Thank you for expressing a alternate viewpoint that I think a lot of people express. They're just afraid to express it. So you are a public figure who is not afraid to stand up for certain things, and I do appreciate that. And just in all, thank you for being you.
Oh, thank you very much, Rizzo. I appreciate it. And who knows, maybe I'll go back someday. When I first went in, before they ever offered me a contract to wrestle, which I mean they did, but obviously, they first asked me if I wanted to produce and be a coach there. And I was like, I'll do it right now. And they're like, no, we're not asking you to retire. We want you to wrestle for us, but so someday I'll probably get roped back into going there in some form, but maybe I'll wrestle there again when the time is right. But for now, Vince told me spread your wings, so I'm gonna do that, and we'll see where it goes. But thank you for watching.
Nice. And Ryan, I'm sorry to Kanye you. I'm gonna let you finish. I promise. On that note, if I may ask, you did tease something not too long ago with WWE and WrestleMania. We were marking out stoked like, yo, is he coming back at Mania? And it was the Hardcore Justice, I guess, appearance. But I mean, was that like to kind of sway everybody or like get everybody talking and thinking with the WWE mentions?
No, I was just joking around. It was that envelope was just a stack of royalty checks they had sent me that week. I technically am still on their. I'm technically still on their payroll. Like maybe I shouldn't have left. My Topps cards and like merchandise and stuff still makes money for them. So I guess they still pay me.
Nice.
But yeah, that's all that was. And it's funny because I had some friends, like people just to give you an idea of like how disjointed, like how big that company is and how disconnected the office is. I had friends who work in the office that were like, oh, you're back? Like they were texting me. They're like, are you back? And like dudes in NXT are like, are you coming back? And I was like, guys, you of all people should know if I am or not. You would be the ones that would know. And no, I'm just messing around, having some fun, but I appreciate the excitement. I guess in a way that was sort of like a nice way to have a positive barometer. Like, the fact that people were excited about it. It's like, okay, well, that's a nice thing to know if I ever decide to go back.
Yeah. Like I said, we got that excited. So Ryan.
I mean, you mentioned Vince, and everybody seems to have a Vince McMahon story. So I wanted to ask, what's your favorite Vince McMahon moment or Vince story that you encountered in your time there?
Oh God, man, I used to talk to him a lot because they always say you should have a good relationship with them and all that. And most guys, I mean, literally 9 out of 10 guys are scared of his door. And I've never been wired like that. I don't get nervous for things or anxious for stuff. And he's just a dude like anybody else. I mean, as far as how I see people, but meeting him, like he really is a dude like anybody else. He likes AC/DC and football, and I think on many levels he wishes guys could still treat him like a normal guy. Because it used to be that he would hang out in catering and be like just like one of the guys. And now for however many years now, he hasn't been able to be like that. For professional reasons, I guess. But I think he sort of like misses that he isn't seen that way. My favorite time was actually Rich Swann and I wanted to pitch creative stuff for him one time. And we knew that the cruiserweights, like it's a tough sell to get a good like creative idea for a match for 205. And what I mean by that is like, if you pitch like say a cage match, that people don't realize that costs like a lot of money. Because you have to ship the cage or pack it or whatever. You have to hire extra crew to do it and the time constraints and all that. I mean, we're talking like thousands of dollars, maybe over $10,000 more. Like it's a lot of money. And so certain things is like, on a show like 205, you're not going to be able to get for like a blow off match idea. But Rich and I wanted to think of something cool. And we're good friends, obviously. We had that little run and I turned heel and all that. And so we were like, we wanted to pitch a long story and we would do a hair match because a hair match is free. And that's something you don't see every day. And both of us were willing to cut our hair, but Rich especially. And we thought, man, it'd be great if the babyface loses the hair match. You never see that, you know, and it's like, what a kick in the nuts that would be. So we were so excited to go pitch this. And we walked in and pitched it to Vince. And it was great. The story is great for so many reasons. One, because Rich had never done something like that before, as far as talking to Vince. So he didn't know how to handle it. And he was really nervous about it. And I was like, I've already talked to Vince a bunch of times. Let me handle it. So we walk in there and Rich like said nothing. And so like I laid out everything. We had like things printed out for him and like just so he could see how it would go. We'll do this first and we'll do this second, like a barbershop moment. I turn on him and rip some of his hair out. And then he, and then eventually we do the hair match at the end. And he looks at us and Vince is like, you're willing to cut your hair? And Rich is like, yeah. He's like, I'm down to do whatever. And Vince is like, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, but he was like, oh, I looked so ugly when I had to cut my hair. Cause he did the hair. We totally forgot that he had done one. And he was like, God, that's great. Like he loved the idea of it. And it is true what they say, like Vince, like people act and yeah, the company can kind of pick on performers a little bit, kind of make you look stupid for their own kicks. But like Vince would do that to himself. And like that that is one of the most valid things and true things is that like he'll never ask you to do something that he isn't willing to do himself. And that includes making a fool out of you. Like if he thinks that something's funny and he's picking on you a little bit, you have to remember he picks on himself. He's done some of the most fucked up shit to himself. Like, yeah. So we pitched this story and he loved it and he was just like relating to, and I remember just kind of like having a out of body kind of moment where I was like, man, like if you would have told me when I was a kid, I'd be sitting in this office in Boston Garden or TD Garden, wherever we were. And like Vince would be having like a dude conversation and laughing with us about like these creative ideas and things and sharing war stories. Like, yeah. I would have like, yeah, that was my favorite Vince moment, was doing that.
That's super cool. And I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit and chat with us. Like super, super appreciated. And I'm a big fan of your work. Growing up in SoCal and LA, you've always been an inspiration to me. So just thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I don't piggyback too much. I want to say you're an inspiration because you're not that much older than I am. And so I do this thing where I know this sounds stupid, but when I tend to sneeze, I get the dab going, and I get it from my wife all the time. It's like, John, you're 31. I was like, TJP does it. All right. I mean, and you're cool. So that's my defense. That's my go-to is like TJP dabs.
Well, thanks for keeping it alive with me.
Yeah, man. So next time you sneeze, man, throw that in there for me. So before we take it home, like I said, I'm in character. We got two SoCal guys here. I got that Lucha Libre gourmet burrito shop shirt, but Mr. Rizzo has got our Walmart We Love Wrestling tee that y'all can get on ProWrestlingTees.com. And also speaking on that, Mr. TJP here has got his own line on ProWrestlingTees.com/TJP. And you guys can find him on Instagram and Twitter, Mega TJP. He's on Twitch as well, twitch.tv/Mega TJP. And also we got a cameo from TJP, and man, I want to say another inspiration. I abbreviate everything. Rizzo gets so annoyed sometimes, he abbreviates things. But when you said all of our names on the cameo, you abbreviated. I was like, it's my boy TJP. I became a bigger fan that day. So you guys, book yourself a cameo, cameo.com/Mega TJP. And I know you also have a why do I have a brain fart? But a collaboration with LegalHustleClothing.com. You have some shirts on there as well. And am I missing anything, or did I miss say?
No, that's a lot of it. You could find. I have another collab with Mass Republic, which is just a wrestling apparel company, but they have some stuff that they're working on, and I think they even have some older designs too, like that I probably may not have on my shop. But you can also find a lot of other cool dude stuff on there. They have like the Lucha Brothers stuff and a lot of cool guys stuff. But yeah, I mean that's about it. It pretty much covers everything. I think me and Fala Bar are gonna drop a co-op shirt coming up that we had designed. So you can find it on either one of our pro wrestling tees. So if you hate my guts, you can just buy his version and he'll get the money for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, you get royalties anyway, right?
I won't. Yeah, if you buy from Follows, then I won't get a dime from it. So if you want to stick it to me, then buy Follows version.
Oh man. Yeah, but once again, like I said, Rizzo, Ryan, I appreciate you guys being on, and TJP, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah.